Hello and welcome back to Woman Enough Marriage. My name is Wumi Ajayi. I'm glad you could join me. Happy Easter to you and your loved ones. I hope you're all well. As I'm concluding the series on forgiveness, I'm going to do like a special Easter edition. So it's going to be in two parts. One part for Easter Sunday and the conclusion, final conclusion on Easter Monday. So please look hard for the second part tomorrow. And I feel that Easter is the best time to talk about forgiveness because Easter is what forgiveness is all about. Easter is about God's love towards us. Easter is about God having compassion for us, such that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Easter is the reason why we can approach God for forgiveness and we can receive forgiveness freely. And it's the same compassion, it's the same love, it's the same, mercy that God had on us and continues to have on us, that He wants us to have on each other as married couples, and even, on other people that we are in relationships with. So, in this video, which is part three, I'll be talking about the offender, the roles that the offender has to play when it comes to forgiveness, the things that the offender should not do, and how the offender can actually help the person that they've offended through the process of forgiveness and healing. And I want to talk about the offender because, in as much as the act of forgiving lies with the person that's been offended, and we have established in my previous videos that when we forgive to free ourselves, not necessarily because of the offender. At the same time, the offender is not devoid of responsibilities when it comes to the process of forgiveness. In Matthew 5:23 to 24, it says, "Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift." So, reading this, we see that the same way in which us receiving forgiveness from God is tied to us forgiving our fellow humans. The acceptance of an offender's act of worship is also tied to them playing their part in the reconciliation. That's why it says, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, not that you have something against them. It says you leave your gift. Don't worship. Leave your act of worship. Forget about offering, forget about worship, forget about anything you want to offer to God. First of all, go back and reconcile. Then come back and offer your gift. So, someone that has offended also has a part to play. And the first thing that the offender should do is to acknowledge the offense. Acknowledge the offense, acknowledge the action, acknowledge the event that has caused the offense. Because when we offer an apology without first of all acknowledging the offense, our apology will not carry so much weight. And in acknowledgement, it's not just the offense that we're acknowledging, we are also acknowledging the effect of the offense because that helps them, makes it easier for them to heal. I would just like to mention that acknowledging the offense or acknowledging the effect of the offense does not necessarily equate to an admission of guilt. Most of the time, the intention behind our action are not to hurt the other person, but that does not change the fact that they are hurt. It does not change the fact that our action or the event or our words or whatever we've done has had a negative impact on them. We won't always agree on, what is an offense and what is not an offense. But it's important that we're magnanimous in our compassion to each other, such that even when you didn't mean to hurt them, the fact that your action makes them feel that way should be acknowledged. It's also important, as I pointed out in my last video, that the offended thinks rationally through an offense because sometimes the things that we call an offense, they might not necessarily be an offense. So we should not get to the point where we are taking offense unnecessarily and demanding that our spouses acknowledge and apologize when they've done nothing wrong. The next thing for an offender is feeling of remorse. It's important that we show that we're remorseful, feeling bad for our actions, feeling bad for the effect that our action has had on our spouse or on the other person in that relationship. Showing some form of remorse is a demonstration of how sorry we are for hurting our spouse, even before we ask them for forgiveness. And I'll just put a note of caution out there that guilt can be destructive to the individual and to the relationship if not dealt with appropriately. So, when we are talking about remorse, yes, there's a feeling of guilt that comes with the offense. We should be mindful not to carry the guilt once we have made peace with God and once we have made peace with our spouse. In other words, it's important that we forgive ourselves. And the party that is offended should also not expect the offender to remain in a perpetual state of guilt or remorse. And it's almost like you're expecting them to make up for the offense for the rest of their life. So once they've shown that they're remorseful and they've apologized, we need to let it go. God does not deal with us that way, and we shouldn't deal with each other like that. Forgiveness is about letting go, it's about having compassion. As humans, we all err, we make mistakes, we fix it, we move on. Those are all the things that contributes to our growth and development. So the next thing is to apologize or ask for forgiveness. A sense of remorse should actually, when we feel bad for our action, it should lead us to ask for forgiveness. Even though we have settled it that the offended should not wait for the offender to ask for forgiveness before they forgive, there is no doubt that we'll be helping our spouse or whoever we have offended to move on, to heal easily when we actually ask for forgiveness. And as individuals, we should never be too proud to ask anybody for forgiveness, let alone our spouses, even our children. If we offend them, there's nothing wrong in daddy saying, I am so sorry, dear. I didn't mean to hurt you. There's not absolutely nothing wrong. We should be humble enough to be able to apologize when we have heard. It's also important that when we apologize, that we are genuine with our apology, because we all know that you see with kids, when they apologize, I'm sorry, and you just know that no, you're not sorry, but there's a way that we will apologize that will mean that our spouses or whoever we've offended will know that genuinely we are sorry. After our apology, then we need to seek reconciliation and restoration of the relationship. Yes, efforts at reconciliation, efforts at restoration should be the responsibility of both parties. However, the offended, the person that you have hurt, they might still be hurting, and they might find it difficult, to take the steps to that will lead to reconciliation and restoration. So the offender should actually take the lead in doing things to reconcile, making efforts at restoring the relationship. Use of reassuring words. I'm sorry I hurt you, I didn't mean to. I love you. Tender loving care, putting efforts at filling up their love tanks again, and all these other things, all these other love actions, they will not go amiss at this stage. The next step is repentance. Repentance basically means turning around. Herbert Martin says repentance is being sorry enough to quit your sin. The proof of repentance is that we don't fall into the same error again. However, we are human, and that's what we do. We err. We often find ourselves committing the same offense over and over again to God, with persistent sin, and our fellow human beings, especially our spouses. But as people in a covenant relationship, who will give account to God of our stewardship in marriage? We owe it to God and to our spouses that we don't continue to hurt them over and over again. So we should continue to make effort to improve on ourselves. We should continue to make effort to improve on areas where we're hurting them, where we're offending. And we should continue to ask God for help to help us in those areas where we struggle. And as the offender, there are some things that we shouldn't do. First of all, an offender should not minimize the offense. We shouldn't say things like, "Oh, my friend has done worse to their spouse. What is the big deal in what I've done?" If you have offended, be humble enough to acknowledge. Don't try to minimize it to make yourself feel better. We should also not dismiss it. When we dismiss an offense, it's like we're making a fool of our spouse. Oh, is that why? Is that why you've been quiet? Oh, I don't see the big deal in it. Is that it? Is that all? No, we shouldn't do that because what again, when an offender does that, it's out of pride. You're trying to make yourself feel better. So you're dismissing the offense. Sometimes we also use avoidance tactics. You change the subject or you ignore the signs that your spouse is unhappy. You know you've done something that they don't like, but you are trying to avoid facing up to what you've done. You are trying to avoid talking about it. We should not employ avoidance tactics when we know that we've offended our spouse or anybody at all. Another thing an offender can do is to blackmail the offended emotionally. Oh, you made me do it. We see that a lot in domestic abuse. Or, people say things like, what else do you want? I've apologized. What else do you want? We should not blackmail them emotionally. Threats. Oh, if you carry on like this marriage will not work. If you carry on like this, oh, this and this will happen. We should not be issuing threats when we have offended our spouse or when we have offended anyone. We should be humble enough to accept that we are in the wrong. Again, losing patience or giving ultimatum to forgive. You can ask for, we can ask for forgiveness, but forgiveness is theirs to give. So it's not for the offender to be saying, "Oh, if you don't forgive me within this time, or if you don't do this within this time." No, we shouldn't lose patience because forgiveness, like we have said, it's a process. So we shouldn't lose patience with our spouses. We shouldn't lose patience with people that we've hurt. We should let them have the time that they need. If you think they're taking too long, then maybe you need to start praying for them that God will quicken the healing process so that they can heal faster. Now, I want to talk about persistent offending. And I think it's important to talk about this because each one of us will have areas of, persistent offending, if I can put it that way. And I always say that some things will never change. Some things will never change because my husband is a man, is not a woman. So there are some fundamental differences in us that, in the first few years of marriage, we might struggle to accept, we might struggle to deal with because we're constantly expecting our spouses to behave like us. So some things will never change. Our personalities will never change. But as we grow in our relationship and as we grow as individuals, which is why it's important that we grow. We realize that we can't change our spouses. And then we start to learn to accommodate our differences, to accommodate each other's weaknesses, such that some of the things that we are offended by, some of the things that used to offend us, then become insignificant. Acceptance becomes key. I know it's easier said than done, but acceptance is very, very important in our relationships. And I'm not saying that acceptance should be, our getaway from jail card that stops people from improving. Oh, you need to accept me as I am. This is me. This is who I am. No, we all need to keep working on ourselves. We all need to keep growing spiritually, emotionally, in the fruit of the spirit, in our minds, in our understanding. We all need to continue to grow. However, some persistent offending can be more harmful than others. A classical example is domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is not acceptable behavior and should not be tolerated. So when we're talking about acceptance, that's not what I mean. I'm not saying that we should go just accept anything that comes our way. No, if a spouse is persistently offending in terms of domestic abuse, that should not be tolerated. And I also want to look at possible reasons for persistent offending. One of the reasons I think might be responsible could be character flaws. And only the individual can do something about it. If as an individual you realize that your spouse is constantly complaining about one area of your life or something, your action or something that you do or how you talk or whatever it is, it's important that we look inward to actually see, actually, how can I improve? How can I get better in this? The offended party, the spouse can only pray, but it is down to the person that has character flaws to actually recognize them, identify that they are character flaws, and start to work on them. Another reason for persistent offending can be spiritual, emotional, and mental immaturity. Again, only the individual can do something about this. Yes, the spouse can pray for them, but if you are not growing, this is why we need to grow. spiritually, mentally, emotionally. We should be growing. We should not remain perpetual babies in any area of our lives. Another reason why I think we someone can be offending persistently is because of the personality weaknesses. Every personality has its strengths and weaknesses, and unless an individual identifies the weaknesses of their personality and they start to work on it, it might constitute an area of persistent offending, whereby they're constantly hurting their spouse. And it's important that we look into. Yes, if you are the offended spouse, you can also pray for them that God will help them to grow in that area. The last one I want to talk about is neurodiversity. I'm not a psychologist, but so I'm going to tread carefully talking about this. But I feel that it's something that's worth a mention. It just generally encompasses the wide spectrum of human behavior and neurological development. It just acknowledges that no two people experience the world exactly the same way. And the fact is that most neurodivergent people will also have atypical strengths. So sometimes people around them find it difficult to understand their neurodivergent behavior. Why are you behaving like that? Why? And it might be an area that will start to take offense at. Let's take, for example, one of the commonest conditions when we talk about neurodiversity is the autism spectrum. Neurodivergencies on the autism spectrum generally involve some combination of differences in how people socialize, how they communicate, their sensory perception, and in their behavior. There are many, autistic people in the world that are functioning in a society, and that's why it's called a, hidden disability. I watched a documentary recently made by an autistic person, and if he's not telling you that he's autistic, then you won't know. And you might be married to someone like that. We might view the differences in them compared to our neurotypical behaviors as weaknesses, whereas that is the way that they are. And if we don't have an understanding of why people act or why people behave the way they behave, we might be taking offense. They might be hurting us when they know meaning to. And I'm not in any way attempting to explain persistent offending away, but with the neurodivergence theory. But I'm just trying to say that it's important that we have a balanced outlook on things. So I want to talk about when sorry does not seem to be enough. There are offenses that have lasting impact on a relationship. Let's say in a marriage relationship, for example, let's say a spouse ends up having a child with another woman through cheating. That you can apologize, you can say sorry, but that does not change anything. It does not change the fact that this offense has a lasting impact. As the offender, what we need to do is to pray for the person, pray for your spouse, pray for the person that you have offended, pray for healing, pray for grace for them to move forward. But as the offender, it's important that we recognize the gravity of the offense, the lasting impact of it, work with our spouse, pray with them, be patient with them, and keep trusting that God will help them to get to the point where they will forgive. There is no sin grievous that God cannot forgive us, and God is able to give people, give us the grace to forgive. People forgive murderers, people that have killed their loved one. People are able to move past it and forgive. So I believe that God is able to supply the grace to forgive. Thank you so much for joining me. In my next video, I'll be talking about the dangers of unforgiveness and the benefits of forgiveness. I hope you can join me. Do remember, like I always say, marriage is to be enjoyed, not to be endured. God bless you.